5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Our Voices on this special MLK Holiday. Again, thank you for tuning in to Our Voices. With me, I have a very special guest with me. He is just no ordinary special guest. He is someone who is a special figure in the African-American community. He is someone that you can turn to for advice. He is, again, a powerful speaker, and he is my friend. He is the Reverend Ron English. Reverend English, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Brother Ray?
I'm doing fine, doing fine.
All right, great.
Also, I just want to let folks know, let the viewers know, one thing about Reverend English, a lot of folks don't know about his statue. He is literally one of Dr. King's ministerial assistants. And also, he is a member of a certain youth group called Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, but I'm not going to hold that against him.
I was really not wearing black and gold.
I figured that, yes. From English, are you before I start asking questions, please tell the viewers something about Reverend English.
Well, I grew up in Atlanta, and I came here to pastor First Baptist Church in Charleston, 1972. And that was primarily because a very good friend of the King family was Lucy James, who was the wife of C.H. James, and he was a trustee. And they were looking for a pastor. And so she called Daddy King and said they were looking for a pastor and wondered whether he would recommend, and he recommended me. And so that's how I wound up to be a candidate for First Baptist Church. And after the process involved preaching 3 times, and that was some others being considered. But after preaching there, they extended the call in 1972. That's how I came to Charleston, West by God, Virginia, from the soul dust of the South.
All right, let's get it started. Reverend English, again, we are here to commemorate Dr. King's holiday, which is the least celebrated holiday in America, which is really sad. You wrote an article in the West Virginia Gazette Mail, which is very interesting. And not only that, we're going to talk about this article that you wrote on January 7th. You're also the president of the Charleston chapter of the NAACP. And you and I had a brief conversation prior to the start of this interview. And we talked briefly about the governor's state of the state address the other day. But for this right here, we're going to label this the state of the African-American address.
All right.
Okay. Because again, there's a lot that needs to be discussed. We're going to talk about that. And again, I'm going to leave it up to you to let folks know what is going on. Reverend English, this article that you wrote, the title is called Time to Shift the Narrative on MLK Day. Please explain to the audience the purpose of that title and why.
Because for the last several years, the narrative, particularly in West Virginia, has been focused on the Dream King. And one of the reasons, there are at least 3 reasons. for feeling like it was time to shift that narrative. One is because the "I have a dream" portion of his speech was not his intended ending for that speech. Wyatt T. Walker, who was his chief of staff, and also another Alpha brother, but anyway, he was his chief of staff, and Wyatt told me one time that I visited him. He said we were trying to get Doc to end it with something else because he had used that so many times before. And they had heard it so many times before. And he had planned to end that speech with another ending. But Mahalia Jackson saw, and because she was a gospel singer, she was used to the rhythm that preachers would get into when they're heading toward a close. And she really felt like, even though it was a good speech and a powerful speech, she felt like it wasn't going to end the way that it ought to end. So that's when she shouted from behind him, "Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream," which meant that she had heard the ending before. And she felt like it would be more appropriate for him to use that ending. And that's when he shifted into an unintended ending that became the tagline of the speech. Now, if you read the other part of the speech, you would see that he was really on point with reference to the narrative of the nightmare of American history in racism and in the struggle for equal equality. So you would see that would be consistent with what he was about. But the ending has unfortunately become the tagline for his speech and almost like the tagline of his life. And it has not really compared with or been referenced in context of the last speech that he wrote, because anyone who heard the last speech that he wrote would know that that was his own authentic ending. And the story behind that was that he was not supposed, I mean, that was the one in Memphis, and that he was so tired that he wasn't going to do it. And so he had told Ralph and Jesse Jackson, to wrap it up, to speak for him. And Ralph saw that the expectation was so high that he called back to the hotel and told Dr. King, said, you got to get over here because they came to hear you. They came to hear you for the Memphis workers strike. And that's when he got up, and that's when he came over, and that's when he gave his last speech, not knowing, of course, that it would be his last. But that's when he really identified what he called the three evils of America. That was militarism, racism, and economic injustice. Unfortunately, that is not given as much attention to what he was up to at the end of his life than this dream speech that he gave in 1963. And so the motives behind commemorating the dream speech and ignoring the radical king who gave that last speech is what has disturbed me for a long time, but particularly in this year, when, as you referenced, the governor's speech last night, as we had testified earlier, last year, about critical race theory and what it's doing as far as a very subtle approach to evaporating from the school curriculum the truth about who we are as Americans and the real American story that can be told that way. And so it has been blocked by legislation that has been intended to snatch out of the American narrative the truth of who we are. And that's one of the because it also reminds me of the kind of textbook controversy, you know, except that those were really limited to some particular textbooks. But yeah, I think we're at that critical point where the resurfacing of the radical king uh, and the attention given to the dream king is a suggestion that we are on the wrong route as far as respecting the real king.
Reverend English, as stated, the Dream King, that's what a lot of America only knows.
Yeah.
When we speak of radical king, and I believe this is where America kind of shifted their focus on king, thinking this isn't the Dr. King that we know. I mean, he's loving, kind, turn the other cheek. But now this radical king, he seems kind of harsh.
Yeah.
Do you feel that in 2023 that we should now move towards, you feel that we should move towards radical king and say, okay, this is what we want, this is what we need. We cannot wait any longer because we've waited this long. We've been patient. It's coming to the point where other nationalities come into this country and we're still being pushed further behind. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think on the last point that, yeah, there are other nationalities coming into the country as at the borders. And so there is an issue in terms of how those managed and handled, but also that they came in pursuit of what America symbolized for them. I think that there are points in America in history that we go through ebb and flow. There are heights and depths, and it's been that way all day. I mean, it's kind of like that's the way creation came from. I mean, creation was snatched out of chaos, out of darkness comes light. And so I think that is something that we have seen a particular pattern in American history. I mean, after the Civil War came a kind of reconstruction that really gave Black folk leadership positions and those kind of things, even though it didn't last long. So that's a particular pattern where it just goes from the ebb and flow of bad news. And I say that because given what we are seeing now and given what we are experiencing now, it's got to come up again in terms of this being the prelude for some significant radical shift that is on the horizon. I fundamentally believe that because it keeps on happening that way. And so that really kind of gives me a reason to rejoice in the space of rupture. And it gives us a chance to really deal with the reality of what we are and who we are. And when it goes back to that, I think that the resurgence that's showing up, in book protests and what is in our educational system and what the whole notion of critical race theory is about, is a sign that there is something troubling that needs to be stopped. And whenever you put on that kind of massive resistance, it means that you have touched a nerve. And when people are in a position where a nerve has been touched, that's when the reality of their reaction becomes more desperate. And I think that's exactly what we are seeing. We are seeing a desperate reaction because the truth, when crushed to earth, will rise again, but it doesn't get a generous applause when it rises. It gets a dominant protest and resistance when it rises. And so I'm telling you that those are the things that keep hope alive for me. And in terms of what I really feel energized about as far as what is coming and what is being raised to the level of awareness where it cannot be denied.
Reverend English, in your article, you talk about the NAACP. Again, you're the president of the Charleston chapter. That you and you all and the Partnership of African American Churches have administered COVID vaccinations across the state.
Right.
Because again, when COVID first hit, there was a disproportionate number of COVID cases to where it affected the African American community, and at the same time, when it came to the vaccine, that right. it wasn't coming to the African American community.
Yeah.
How far have we come when it comes to that particular aspect as far as helping out Black folks?
Well, one of the things that we've discovered in the research in terms of how it affected the African American community, it really had a devastating impact initially. But because it was primarily on African Americans, it didn't get that kind of attention in order for vaccines to really be distributed and to really be used and to be seen as the means by which the COVID crisis would be dealt with. It was when it started moving into the white community that it became more of an issue in terms of how it was being mismanaged and or how vaccine was not being used, and how it was really spurred by the fact that it had come to the attention of more than the devastation in the Black community. So that's part of the story in terms of how it started. But when it did start, as far as getting the COVID vaccinations, there was resistance among Black folk, and there still is. And at first, I thought it was because of the Tuskegee experiment, which years ago, they were using the School of Medicine at Tuskegee, or at that time was experimenting with the vaccine, and it really was pervasive in the African American community as far as those vaccines. But it was not for the purpose of really healing. It was really for the purpose of destroying, and it was really for the purpose of using them as puppets, for that kind of research. I thought that was the reason. I found out there was a whole lot of folk who were resisting vaccines that didn't know anything about the Tuskegee experiment. What was impacting the resistance to vaccine was social media, and how the stories on social media were really scaring people in terms of getting that vaccine. And so that resistance is what we are still dealing with. And PAC has recognized ways in which and strategies in which we need to shift that narrative, as well as making vaccines available in all parts of the state. And so what I've been a part of with the PAC team is seeing where we can go to do vaccinations, set up vaccinations. And more recently, it's really moved into Southern West Virginia, where there are not sufficient resources and places, and hospitals and clinics, to do that. And so we're kind of really targeting those areas where that is a lack of a place and space for getting the vaccinations, and therefore it may relieve what is happening in those areas. So part of what we have been able to do, which in partnership with the African American, with the NAACP and PAC, is to put boots on the ground by way of NAACP members, organizations in those communities where we can utilize them as a resource and as a connection for setting up vaccination sites where they are needed to be set up, and then telling the story to kind of help deal with the resistance by having boots on the ground with people who are in those communities. And sometimes that's how you make a contact, by making a connection with folks in the communities who are trusted voices. And some of those are elderly folk, some of those are people who just been around a while and who have the listening ear of that community. So that's a major strategy as far as boots on the ground, being able to enable us to make impact with the vaccinations, as well as information about how we can not be victimized by our own unawareness.
As you all know, there's a new variant out as far as COVID. There's a new variant out. And I'm going to reach out to Dr. Clay Marsh. I'm going to try to get an interview with him to talk about this current variant of the virus. Yeah. Some say it is it has a pack a punch. And so we need to be vaccinated and protect ourselves.
Yeah, I mentioned. Right quick. I'm glad you mentioned Clay Marsh, because he's had an opening ear. I've had conversations with him and two or three others, and told them really what we were pushing as far as the healing king, and he was very much open to that, because he saw how that can be a segue into getting attention and to getting focus on how the message of Dr. King can be addressed to this current situation if we move away from the dream king to the healing king.
Okay.
Because the healing king helps us to deal with health disparities. That is the current phase of the human rights movement.
What are some of the health disparities that we are facing today in West Virginia?
Well, aside from the vaccinations and COVID, there are multitudes of them that have been, some of which come to mind, that they're all related to situation of poverty, situation of isolation, a situation of ignorance, in terms of how we have been misused and abused, that kind of thing. So there are several that move from hepatitis to a number that has been on the list for a long time. But COVID is the one that is getting that kind of attention that needs to be focused for right now, because of the vaccination being available. But then we have others that have been around a long time. And those two become a part of the repertoire of repair, in terms of and the reason for focus on how we can heal ourselves when we become aware of the means of healing, the need for that healing, and the availability of resources that are now available that they have not been before. So a lot of that is tracking how the information is being made available for not only COVID, but for a number of diseases that have particularly affected African Americans from the time we got here.
Reverend Ron English is my guest. Reverend English, you mentioned about the three evils of American society back in the 60s. And again, you and I, we spoke in length because we had a special. We did a clip that came out in 2018, the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that the three evils of American society, has it changed for the better or as for the worse? Has it changed, since the death of George Floyd?
It initially shifted at the death of George Floyd and those that lined up behind him, because it really stimulated the Black Lives Movement. And in that sense, it brought to awareness, both nationally and internationally, the issue of racism. As soon as that happened, though, then the backlash became prominent in certain ways where nobody was saying that that was wrong, but it was put in it was put in the context now that it almost seemed like it was un-American. That this is this is not the way that our country was founded. This is not the reason that our country was founded. This is, I mean, this is really challenging the etiquette of the empire, for want of a better term. So when it comes to rewriting American history, see, nobody wants to deal with the fact that the authors of the Constitution, I mean, the authors of the Bill of Rights, the authors of those founding fathers, were all slaveholders. I mean, that word hadn't got around, and therefore the inspiration that inspired Jefferson to write all men are created equal, and he was a slaveholder. So all the founding fathers were slaveholders, and therefore it's evident that it was not because they were trying to do any human rights improvement program, because they were all slave owners, and therefore that particular system was what they revered. And it seemed like there were exceptions along that line. That might have been by the providence of God that they made some noble truths, evident. So this has just been a part of our American story for a long time, and I just think again that it's coming to. It's like that old song, that old saying: "The buzzards have come home to roost." But
the buzzards
come home.
I thought the chickens, but okay.
Yeah, check it out. Okay. All right, thank you. So those kinds of realities that speak through that kind of saying, is really very profound in terms of the movement. But I think, again, it's an exciting time to be in, because this is bringing to awareness and bringing to the surface what had gone underground when we thought we were moving toward a more civil society. And now we are discovering there's so much work yet to be done before the truth is really embraced rather than used and reframed in a way to keep the kind of sleep and comfort nourished.
In your opinion, Reverend English, how far have we come? I know it's a hard question. How far have we come?
It is, and it's because in a way it bears the question of evaluating how far we have come with a sense of satisfaction and celebration. And there are certain ways that we can say we have come a long way, but and not King used to often say, we've come a long way, but we have a long, long way to go. So how far we have come is a way of giving a modest applause for our journey, you know, in the country as people and that kind of thing. But it's not hardly giving an overwhelming ovation for how far we have come, because it would not be a genuine response to the reality of the American experience, you know, in terms of how it particularly has been trouble with the issue of racism. Even now, as we hear the conversation, it's like we don't want to talk about racism. You know, we want to put it in more polite terms of what Dr. King used to call the niceties of complexity that really aid our confusion.
Okay. Okay. I like that phrase. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And he would often say that. But but again, the fact that it is surfacing in this particular time and around these particular issues means that it's getting the kind of exposure, and you can't heal what you don't acknowledge.
Reverend English, we are looking into 2023, the state of the African American community, the state of the African American address, the state of state. Where should we be as a race when it comes to education? And the reason why I asked that question, there's a report that shows that Black students are getting suspended at a much higher rate than white students.
Yeah.
What should we do about that? What can we do? Because it seems as if we cannot get a response from the powers that be. It's just a matter of kicking the can down the road. Say, okay, you know, we'll do a 2-year report. Well, it's 2 years is up, and you know you get very little to no explanation as to why. What should we do?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I'm glad you asked it because I am a substitute teacher in the Canarsie County school system. I haven't done it in the last 2 years or so. And so it gave me a chance to kind of see what was happening in the classroom, as well as conversations in the teacher's lounge. And in some places, those conversations in the teacher's lounge were very disappointing as far as how they talked about certain students. And it became clear that many of those were Black, and how they were kind of downplaying, or the kind of focus was on the ways in which they were a problem. And when you focus on how students are a problem, then you're not going to pay attention to what contributes to that problem, or how beyond the problem there is a promise, that is a way of reaching them in such a way that you can get attention. And it was amazing to see how in some situations where kids were on the way home because of suspensions and that kind of thing, that some teacher intervened And oftentimes it was a Black teacher, who intervened on behalf because they saw what was going on. And they were a part of the culture, but they were not absorbed in the culture. And unfortunately, that stage or number of teachers has diminished. I mean, black teachers who kind of carried that mission in their hearts, and they were sharing their hearts with their students, and so it was a matter of trying to feed the head and the heart with how they were shaping lives, and I really appreciated that because I had a firsthand experience of that. My ex-wife was a teacher, and she just had that kind of momentum and interest. So part of what is happening in the educational system is how you get bogged down in conversation about legislation of education, well, versus the task of learning and teaching more than a program or a protocol, but as a way of trying to reach those particular students that seem to be the hell raisers. Because we know, Ray, that there have many hell raisers that came out and really did some magnificent and marvelous things. So yes. It's just moving beyond seeing them as hell raisers and seeing them as a resource that, if given a chance, and if given an ear, and if given that kind of attention, would make a significant difference. And the evidence is there all around us in terms of how that can happen. But when it's approached as a system, then people get anonymous in systems.
Yeah. I interviewed a young lady, came out of Roane County. She's biracial. And she was, she grew up in the Roane County school system. She was sent away to boarding school because she was bullied and everything because of her race and because of her features. So she comes back, she goes to college, she gets a degree. She's a substitute teacher. And the kids up there were interested in in her looks. And they were asking about her culture and everything. So it got to the point where the Board of Education basically kicked her out. Looking at it now, as far as education, as we both know, and some have said that there's no nurturing when it comes to us. It's just a matter of just suspend the kid, take them out of the class, eliminate the problem, and that's it. There won't be a problem. I say when it comes to that, to me, it's just another way of pre-Brown versus Board of Education, segregation in the system. That's my point of view. So you got parents that get in conflict with the teachers. Who's right and who's wrong? Do you have any advice for parents, Black parents, to right the wrong, if there is a wrong? What advice do you have?
Question. Yeah, right. Who defines wrong? And I mean, there's certain wrongs that are very obvious in terms of how, but in terms of how the story behind who is being charged with a wrong and why they are being charged with a wrong, that's where the parent intervention is. There's nothing very more threatening than to see a Black mother on the way to school in defense of her child. I mean, that that can be that can be enlightening, that can be encouraging, but also it can be kind of terrifying for those that she's going to be confronted or be confronting in terms of the defense of that child. And part of that comes from the parents being aware of what is going on at the school. And that's through parent teachers meeting and stuff like that. But it's also being available for showing up in ways that say, I am going to be present here for my child. And when I've seen it and I believe it, that when teachers know that that child has a parent that is likely to show up and be present and not just take what the rap is for what that child has done, then that presents a different kind of conversation. That presents the opportunity for a different kind of conversation. Now, I know, it will likely happen that somebody will show up and try to defend the wrong, but just I think that the presence makes a difference as far as showing the concern and knowing that we have to be aware of how parents are watching, particularly parents of black kids, youth, are watching and are not on the radar, on the outside, but that they're likely to show up on the inside. And that's where I think that the difference can be made as far as the presence in the space on the scene. And it may not definitely wouldn't be all, as far as everybody being innocent, But I just think that the presence makes a difference as far as kind of getting in touch with the backstory behind the story that is often told. Yeah.
I have a few more questions. I'm going to let you go. And again, this is about the MLK holiday. And again, and as far as the state of the African-American community, where we are, what we need to do, and where we need to go. And most of all, we need to come, as a collective, as a collective group, because again, as I've said before, I've told folks, racism has reared its ugly head. We have gotten to the point where, there's so much that's going on out here, and we see that in the news, police brutality, just the Karen stories. Just so much is taking place. And I know that here in West Virginia, some folks say, you know what, it's not going to happen here. In some way, shape, or form, Reverend English, it has happened here. Nobody really wants to address the issue. You see. Again, just a few more questions. I'm going to let you go. The NAACP, is for the advancement, the Association of Advancement, the National Association of Advancement of Colored People. What other tasks that your chapter is doing to help Charleston? What other things that you're doing?
Yeah, one of the things, because this is my second term as president, but going into the second term as president, because each term is a 2-year term. And one of the things that I have appreciated about how the chapter has moved is because it has a political action committee that is very active, in the community and keeps the chapter informed on what is going on in the community. And likewise, last week, Pastor Watts, who has been very active in dealing with student suspensions, but also very active in kind of focusing on what is happening in our community in healthcare, health disparities, etc. And but primarily in terms of the work of working with student suspensions and how that has impacted our community as well as our children. So I think that how the Charleston chapter has been reorganized and revitalized in terms of the use of folk. And I said, we don't want you to join the Charleston branch NAACP because you feel you have to, but because you want to. And I did come up during the time when you joined NAACP because it was just expected. You just didn't join that. And it was because really on January the 1st in Atlanta, it was celebrated as Emancipation Proclamation with a service at Big Bethel Church. And that's where I heard, not only Dr. King, but that's where I heard Thurgood Marshall. That's where they would bring in all of the notables in the movement, and you would listen to them. And that was a spirit about that Emancipation Proclamation service, that the holidays weren't over until it had happened. You know, and so that's kind of like the culture of how our presence and present was tied in with the past as the meaning of the Emancipation Proclamation. That doesn't happen here, you know. And I can kind of understand that because that's from the Deep South. You know? But to have rituals and to have celebrations that really lift up the lessons of history and the challenges that we are dealing with now is a way of connecting head and heart as far as how we bring something as a resource to that to that conflict or to that issue or to that situation. You know? So and that's the only thing that's really kind of encouraging as far as what I see happening in the Charleston branch NAACP. We now have a situation where we can both do Zoom and in-person meetings, and I'm encouraged by the way that the agenda is constantly being shaped by the concerns that are brought to the table. And those concerns are brought to the table by people who are involved in health, education, political awareness, and what is moving in the community that they are a part of. And they just want to enlarge that base by engaging members of the NAACP to get on board.
All right. So you have explained to me the state of the state of the African American state right now, and this is great. This is wonderful, Reverend English. I want, before I let you go, please tell the viewers how they can join the NAACP, and just tell them, you know, where you're going from this point on, and how you, like I said, and just how can they reach you?
Well, one way of doing that is my email address, which is my name, Ronald English 23 @gmail.com. And from there, we can we can provide an application. Of course, we do it at our meeting, excuse me, but we can provide that application. So just the email address to me, Ronald English 23 @gmail.com. and we will make sure that you get an application, and then that application will be processed. And after that application is processed, then you are sent a membership card, and that will make it possible to be a part of. But I've even opened it up to people who have an interest, but may not yet have made that determination, and even to invite people to sit in on a meeting. And since we have that Zoom connection, we are willing to do that. And that is for people to sit in on a meeting, get a feel of what's going on here. And then they will be able to see for themselves what is happening in a way that I think will speak to how they would want to be involved. So again, we don't want you to become part of NAACP because you ought to. We want you to become a part of it because you want to, because you are up to what we are into. And when you are up to what we are into, then we are in this thing together. And so that's the basic way that we try to recruit members of the NAACP. And so, yeah, that's the first stage, is that I would receive that request or receive some notification of interest, and then follow through with a membership. And then, again, because we are meeting both by Zoom and in person, that means that it will be possible to be in the meeting, whether you are in person or remote.
Reverend English, again, once again, it's an honor to talk to you, and again, to share your knowledge. And again, like I said, I enjoy this. We should do this more often.
I definitely look forward to it.
Because again, you have, like I said, you bring out things to where a lot of folks just don't see it. And again, I salute you for that.
Well, one thing that just kind of came to mind right quick, and that is the book that Dr. King made a sermon out of, was called The Drum Major Instinct. And as I was serving as his assistant at Ebenezer, I had to get up out of the pulpit and go to the office. I think I left my checkbook over there in the offertory, was being prepared. As I walked in, got the checkbook, and he went into the sermon. And the sermon was called The Drum Major Instinct. Well, I saw on his desk a book entitled The Drum Major Instinct. But he elaborated on it in such a way, and that was among the last sermons that he preached. But he elaborated how the drum major instinct is really what he took to be his calling, and to hopefully draft others into the leading role of being a motivational role. And that's when he had ended that sermon by saying, if I'm around, if y'all are around when my time comes, let them know I was a drum major for justice. And that's why whenever anybody talks about the Dream King, he never named himself or called himself a dreamer, but he did call himself a drum major.
A drum major for peace.
A drum major for peace.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
Reverend English, thank you very much for coming on to Our Voices. You take care and be safe, okay?
That's all right. I appreciate the opportunity.
Hold on.